I've been studying metaphysics for 50 years or more, and it started when I had a out-of-body experience when I was about 25 years old. It was brought on by a combination of alcohol, marijuana, and a really bad case of the flu. And up until that time, I was what you would call a scientific materialist, a secular humanist, I guess today called physicalist, who believed that all that existed was matter. But when I was floating up near the ceiling, looking down at my body on the bed, it became clear to me that I'm not my body, that I'm my consciousness. And that eye-opening episode is what started me on the quest to learn the true nature of reality. And as I've said, I've been on that for about 50 years. I joined the Rosicrucian order. I did all their studies. I went from novice to adept, and I can tell you the Rosicrucians know what's going on. They know everything you're going to say today, I would say. And of course, I had that internet radio show where I talked to maybe better than 100 experts, people who had written books, quantum physicists, people who were studying psychic phenomena, studying mediums to see whether they could really do what they say they could do using double-blind studies and so forth. And I've written about a half a dozen or so books on metaphysics as well as other things like life after death. And I've written some novels and so forth too. But I do have my business now is the Oakley Press. We have more than 200 books in print. If you know anybody who needs editing or ghostwriting, that's something that I do. And I publish books. So what I've been trying to do with my books is explode the myths of worldviews that are held by most Westerners today. I think there are essentially two worldviews. One is the physicalist, secular humanist view, and the other, which is that only material substance exists. There's no life after death. There's no spiritual realm. Life is, just an accident. And the other one is the one that's based on Christian doctrine, which is that based on what Jesus said when he came to earth. And I believe that Jesus was an enlightened being who really knew what he was talking about, but it was almost impossible for the people of his time to understand what he was really saying. So I consider myself a follower of Jesus, a Christian, and that's the reason. Let's put up the next slide, Dan. Secular humanism is the view that's taught in the schools still. The basic premise is material substance, matter is all that exists. It's based on Newtonian physics and Darwinian theory. It's strictly non-religious. There's no life after death. There's no God. Happiness and social justice are the goals. With respect to politics, the end justifies the means since there's no moral code. And unfortunately, it leads many people to nihilism. That since life is fairly temporary, it's short, it ends at death, it really has no meaning. As the popular saying goes, life's a bitch and then you die. Now, Christianity, the worldview that's taught in church, the basis of which is that God created the universe. The basic code of ethics, of course, is the Ten Commandments, and Jesus added to that, love God with all your heart and all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself, which I think is a pretty good code to go by. In addition, Christianity holds that we humans are flawed. We're imperfect beings, which is why God sent his only son to die on the cross as a sacrifice for those who are willing to accept him. And if you do that, you'll go to heaven. So, as I mentioned earlier, Christian doctrine really is based on what people knew at the time that Jesus lived. The idea of sacrificing an animal for your sins, could even to get God to accept you was an idea that was prevalent at that time. So no wonder the early leaders of the church latched on to that, Jesus. But another thing that Christians, most of them, not all, think is that God is an anthropomorphic being who lives outside of his creation in heaven. We're going to see that that's not the case. Let's put up the next slide, Dan. The true nature of reality has been known for almost 100 years, maybe even longer. Certainly has been by other people, scientists. But as far as the modern era, Max Planck put it succinctly, and he's quoted in a newspaper article in The Observer on October 25th, 1931, and he is, of course, the Nobel Prize-winning individual who developed quantum theory. And he says, and I'm going to quote here, if I can find it. Let's see. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. Put up the next one. Now, according to a number of websites, I got this particular one from Goodreads. Max Planck also said, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds those most minute solar systems of the atom together. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Now, Max Planck's not the only one who says this, and not the only quantum physicist to hold this view. And I've interviewed a few, and one that I interviewed is Henry Stapp. And he has written a couple of books on this subject. One is called Mindful Universe, Quantum Mechanics, and the Participating Observer, and another one, Mind, Matter, and Quantum Mechanics. Go ahead. John Hegelin is another quantum physicist who's gone public. He is a Harvard PhD in quantum mechanics, and he summarized a theory about how the physical reality in which we live came to be, and he says emerged from the unified field, which he compares to the field of pure consciousness known as Veda, which was described in the ancient religious texts of India called the Vedas. Dr. Hegelin maintains that the unified field and Veda are the same, but simply have different names, and how the Big Bang unfolded coincides with the steps that the ancient rishis, sages who lived thousands of years ago, about 5,000 years ago, described as having taken place during the creation of the physical universe. Now, it's really impossible to underestimate the magnitude of what quantum physicists are telling us. The implications are huge. And for one thing, it belies the idea that secular humanists and physicalists have that all that exists is matter. The truth is that what they think of as matter does not exist. As Albert Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, indicates, matter is energy and energy is matter. And as Einstein put it, reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent. The truth is that what does exist is energy that is conscious energy, what I think of as life force, and what Max Planck labeled the intelligent mind that is the matrix of all matter. Secular humanists must either argue that the universe has always existed, which flies in the face of the red shift and the resulting Big Bang theory, or that it miraculously came from nothing. As British biochemist Robert Sheldrake said in a now banned TED Talk, some scientists today say, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. And the one free miracle is the appearance of all the matter and energy of the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in a single instant. Now, while a vibrating quantum realm that gives rise to physical reality no doubt exists, there needs to be an explanation put forth to explain what that is and where it came from. And what Max Planck said makes sense. Consciousness is the ground of being. Consciousness needs nothing else to support itself. For example, René Descartes said back in the 16th century, he famously said, I think, therefore I am. In other words, nothing is required beyond consciousness for its existence to be a demonstrated fact, making it the bedrock of reality. Now, can you go back? In humans, this ground of being manifests in the sense of being. Nothing, the I am that we all feel, what I call the silent observer at the back of my mind, the back of your mind. And this sense of being is not an individual's mind, but I do believe it is the decision maker in each of us that observes the thoughts that come forth and decides which ones to act upon and which ones to dismiss. In summary, what I think is the truth is that reality as we know it is created by one mind that we're all part of, and we each have what might be thought of as a piece of that mind, a sliver of that mind, which creates the feeling or the belief that we're separate beings. This feeling of separation is actually an illusion that's created by our egos. The ego is a construction. Your ego, my ego, were built up since birth with memories and beliefs that reside in the unconscious part of our minds. We each have a subconscious mind or soul that contains all the memories of our past lives. Carl Jung called this part of us the higher self, or the self with a capital S. Sir James Jeans, if in fact consciousness is primal, then consciousness must create everything. Sir James Jeans, who was also a quantum physicist, suggested that the universe resembles an enormous thought, that the physical reality we inhabit might be compared to a thought or a dream that the mind is having, the source is having. Now think about this. When you and I dream at night, our minds create our dreams, create the imagery and all the trappings, and yet they seem completely real. If, for example, a car in your dream is about to run you over, you're certain you're going to be hurt, so you wake up, but you don't realize it's a dream until your eyes pop open. Now think about this. There has to be a character in the dream from whose point of view what's happening is observed. There cannot be a dream without somebody observing it. And in your dreams, that person is you. It follows that the universe, if it's a dream, in the mind of source, there has to be a character in the dream to observe it. Who is that character? You are that character. I am that character. Human beings, all living things, are characters in the Creator's dream that observe what's going on. And since all is one and all is connected, including the Creator and us, we serve as the Creator's eyes and ears. We are the vehicles by which the source knows his, her, its creation. Now, what we're going to do now is look at some research that supports that we're part of one mind and that we are the eyes and ears of that one mind. The double slit? Okay, keep that up. Quantum mechanics experiment known as the double slit experiment, for example, demonstrates that observation by the researcher, in other words, the researcher's consciousness, what he knows, causes light to become particles, light waves to become particles. In 1803, a man named Thomas Young demonstrated that light is waves by placing, you can see that at the top of this slide, placing a screen between light and a wall that had two slits in it that were not wider than the wavelength of light. When waves pass through any opening that's not as wide as they are, the waves refract. And this was the case with one slit open. A fuzzy circle of light appeared on the wall. But when both slits were open, alternating bands of light and darkness appeared, which scientists call a zebra pattern. These areas of light and dark result from what is known as wave mechanics. And wave mechanics is interference. The waves reinforce each other in some places and they cancel each other out in other places. Now, in 1905, Albert Einstein published a paper that revealed that light also behaves as particles. Today we call them photons. He did so by using the photoelectric effect. When light hits the surface of the metal, it jars electrons loose from the atoms in the metal and sends them flying as though they've been struck by tiny billiard balls. Today it's possible to shoot photons one at a time from a photon gun. So let's consider an experiment constructed to determine what happens when those conducting the experiment observe or do not observe which slits the photons of light pass through. As previously stated, humans are characters within the Creator's dream, and therefore we are the vehicles through which the Creator observes his creation. This includes the researchers involved in this experiment. When the Creator cannot observe something through one of us, whatever may be going on will necessarily remain potential. In this case, that means that light will stay potential in the form of waves. In other words, they cannot form into particles, which are matter. In this experiment, the photon gun fires one photon at a time. Both slits are open, and a detector is used to determine which slit the photon passed through and where it hit. The photons make tiny marks, tiny dots, on a photosensitive screen where they hit. Since only one photon is shot at a time, logic would say there can be no interference. However, when the detector is turned off and it's impossible for anyone to observe which slit the photon went through, something counterintuitive, I would say mind-blowing, really happens. The photons shot from the gun form a zebra pattern. In other words, without the detector making it possible for the researcher and therefore the Creator for infinite mind to observe which slit a particle went through and where it hit, the particles are not particles at all. They remain potential in the form of matter. The top screen, there's the photon gun shooting, and even though they're shot one at a time, it forms a zebra pattern. All right, let's go. Okay. When the researcher is able to know, because the detector is turned on, the waves become particles that form a pattern on the photosensitive screen. Now, these phenomena were verified by setting up the experiment a number of different ways, and they've been repeated and confirmed in laboratories throughout the world. In one way, the researchers placed the detectors before the screen, before the two slits, and the photons before the photons pass through them. In a third variation, a detector was placed before the slits, and the mechanism erased the knowledge after the photons had passed through. The zebra pattern returned. The results were the same no matter which way the experiment was set up. Before the slits, after the slits, and then erased, it came out the same either way. Now, the double slit experiment shows that consciousness or mind in the form, changes potential in the form of waves into physical matter in the form of particles, photons. Of course, this is something that secular humanists say is impossible, but is it? Well, not according to evidence collected by a college professor named Stephen Hawley, whom I interviewed a couple of times on that weekly internet radio show, podcast. At the time, Dr. Browdy was a tenured professor of philosophy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I just read his book, The Gold Leaf Lady and Other Parapsychological Phenomena or Investigations. Dr. Browdy related a number of well-documented and amazing stories of mind over matter, but perhaps the most fantastic one had to do with Katie. She was a woman born in Tennessee. She was the 10th of 12 children. Katie apparently was a simple woman. She was illiterate, and at the time Dr. Browdy wrote the book, she lived in Florida with her husband and worked as a domestic. She was also a psychic who had documented successes helping the police solve crime. In one instance, she was able to describe the details of the case so thoroughly and accurately that the police actually thought she might have been responsible, and they thought that until the true perps were apprehended. She also apparently is able to apport objects, which in other words means she's able to cause something to disappear in one place and reappear in another. Now, it's pretty fantastic, but Dr. Browdy maintained that it was true when I spoke with him. And that wasn't all. Seeds would germinate in her hands rapidly, in her cupped hands. And observers have seen her bend metal as well. She's both a healer and a medium, or a channel. According to the physics class I took in college back at Hampton, Sydney, matter cannot be created or destroyed. But apparently that's not so, because what looks like gold foil forms on Katie's skin, on her hands, on her face, on her arms, on her legs. This is a picture of that. Apparently it comes out of thin air. If you want to see this for yourself, there are several YouTube videos that you can watch. You go to YouTube and put Gold Leaf Lady Browdy, B-R-A-U-D-E, in the search bar. Several videos will come up and you can watch it happen. Dr. Browdy took this foil to be analyzed, and it turned out not to be gold, but it was brass, approximately 80% copper and 20% zinc. He thinks there's a reason her mind produces this brass instead of gold. Katie had a difficult relationship with her husband, and she once supported a carving set. It just appeared. Her husband, apparently nonplussed, said, "Oh, so what? It's not worth anything." And soon after that, gold-covered foil began appearing on her skin. But it wasn't real gold. It was fool's gold, brass. Dr. Browdy thinks this is how she gets back at her husband. Okay, so clearly, what's being taught in schools and colleges is patently false. Matter is derivative from consciousness, not the other way around. As Einstein said, reality is merely an illusion, albeit a persistent. The truth is, we're all part of one mind. We're not neat robots with computer-like brains. We are consciousness incarnate, and our brains integrate our consciousness with our bodies. So the question I'd like to address now is, how did this mistaken worldview come about? Let's do a quick review. There was a time, anthropologists tell us, when humans felt at one with nature. This can be seen today in primitive cultures. Called pantheism, humans felt they were an integral part of the ecosystem. The divine showed itself in many forms and was present in all things. But as humans grew more self-aware, they began to feel separation. The myth of Adam and Eve recalls the time when humans parted company with the view that they could commune with the divine. They cut the cord by exercising free will. No longer seeing God in themselves and in others, we humans conjured up gods outside ourselves. In ancient Greece, for example, many gods representing different human qualities were thought to exist. The worldview that evolved in those ancient times had humans in the middle between two worlds, a place the Chinese called the Middle Kingdom. The gods lived above the clouds of Mount Olympus, and although they did come to Earth now and then, it was mostly just to cause problems for us humans. Below the Middle Kingdom, what caused it to be in the middle, was the underworld, the home of the dead, where Hades was in charge, and a three-headed dog called Cerberus guarded a gate one got to after crossing the river Styx. Different cultures had different takes on this three-layered universe. Then as now, ideas about God and gods differed depending on the group one belonged to. The Egyptians had Baal, the Jews had Yahweh, the Romans and the Greeks had a pantheon. Then along came Jesus of Nazareth, and the idea emerged that only one God ruled over creation, although he did have angels and eventually saints who took up some of the positions by the departing Roman and Greek gods. In 1994, Karen Armstrong published a book called The History of God, the 4,000-Year Quest of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That book chronicled the history of the emergence of the one God concept. Because of this idea, the worldview changed somewhat. God and angels, gods of the pantheon, lived above the clouds. An angel called Satan replaced Hades, and the place below ground became hell rather than the underworld, and hell was, of course, where evildoers went. Good folk would be raised at the end of time on Judgment Day and given new light bodies. And this view held sway for more than 1,000 years in Europe and Western culture, but was destined to change again because of a new scientific discovery by Christopher Columbus. Columbus lived on high ground overlooking the Mediterranean harbor. You know, I have been there. I've seen the ruin of what is said to be Christopher Columbus's house, where he grew up in Corsica. Corsica was then part of Genoa, so the French can claim Columbus since Corsica is now part of France. But anyway, and they do. In that part of the world, there's no humidity. It's really, particularly in the summertime, the air is very clear. And if Columbus had good eyes, he could see ships climb up over the horizon without a spyglass. And I've witnessed this. He could tell that the world was round. It's amazing. As I said, I've seen it. Because it's very high ground, and you can look, see him climbing up over the horizon. So anyway, he decided, I guess, to prove that by sailing west to the East Indies. Of course, he never actually made it. But some of Ferdinand Magellan's crew did make it. Of the 237 men who set out on 5 ships in 1519, 18 actually completed the circumnavigation of the globe and returned to Spain in 1522. Well, the newly realized fact that the world was round forced the then commonly held worldview about the Middle Kingdom and so forth to change. Since people and most important church leaders believed that God created, however, the earth remained at the center of the universe. Now that heaven and the dwelling place of God was seen as somewhere above the stars, hell was down below the ground where hot lava came up when volcanoes erupted. But it wasn't long before this worldview had to be updated. A fellow named Nicholas Copernicus determined that the sun was at the center of the solar system and that the earth revolved around it. The church, of course, which was the authority back then, as science is today, pretty much ignored this concept because it didn't go along with accepted canon. This sort of look the other way tactic, by the way, has been used time and again in the 20th and 21st century by physicalists. A century later, Galileo, a man who couldn't leave well enough alone, supported Copernicus' theory, and this was heresy. At that time, people were being burned at the stake for less. And indeed, the leaders of the church told Galileo he'd better repent, and he did. As a result, Galileo got off easy. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest by the orders of the Inquisition. But even the church couldn't keep word from getting out. Eventually, they had to accept the idea that the sun was the center of the solar system. The earth was not the center of creation. Science marched ahead. In 1675, a Dutchman named Antoine Leeuwenhoek, I guess that's how you pronounce that, an amateur lens grinder, saw for the first time organisms he called animalcules living in stagnant water. He spotted them in the scum of his teeth, too. But anyway, he didn't know that, or ever figure out that those animalcules caused disease. That didn't take place until sometime in the late 19th century with Madame Curie and so forth. In 1692, Salem, Massachusetts, 18 were hanged, including one of my ancestors, Susanna North Martin, and one was crushed to death because they were thought to be witches in league with Satan. I wrote a book about this called The Witch in the Family that focused on my 7 times great-grandmother. Eventually, the folks in Massachusetts realized they'd made a terrible mistake. And the reason, you see, is because a new day was dawning. It was a period alternatively called the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, had argued that aside from God, the first cause, who created the material world, nothing existed that is not of the material world. The logic he used was simple. How could it if God created everything? Of course, at that time, all anybody could see was material stuff. This view ultimately led to the clockmaker theory, the idea that God created the universe, wound it up, let it go, and was no longer involved in its operation. Natural laws had been created that kept what had been started in motion, and this idea was called deism. Many founding fathers, including Thomas Jefferson, subscribed to this view. Hobbes had a big impact on the Age of Enlightenment, which was to pick up steam in the 18th century. Isaac Newton was the big kahuna, an English physicist, mathematician, astronomer, natural philosopher, and alchemist, and theologian. Certainly one of the most influential men of all time, his work is considered to be the groundwork for most of classical mechanics. The prevailing worldview that emerged from the Age of Reason was that the universe might be compared to a giant machine. The sun was at the center of the solar system. The earth had planets that revolved around it. Nothing existed but the material world. What was thought of in the 17th century and before as the invisible world of spirits did not exist. Everything that happened had a logical cause. Natural laws caused everything. Yeah. Then along came Charles Darwin in 1859. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, a book that introduced the theory that populations evolve over the course of generations through a process called natural selection. In other words, God had not created the variety of life on the planet, nor had he created humans. All this had happened through a natural, what might be thought of as a mechanical process. And this became accepted fact among the educated classes. Life and diversity were results of a natural process known as survival of the fittest, coupled with the environment in which a particular species had evolved. Intelligence and mind had evolved as life had evolved and had reached its pinnacle in humans. Mind and intelligence were produced by an organ, the brain, which had come about through evolution. And this is where we are today in schools and colleges, clearly stuck in 1859 thinking. To question it, even if you happen to be a quantum physicist, is likely to subject a person to ridicule. It certainly has happened to me, but after I had that out-of-body experience at age 25, I decided the occasional one-star reviews, coupled with rants, were the product of closed-minded morons. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, I did a lot of reading and studying, and one book that had a major impact on me was entitled Intelligence Came First. It was compiled and edited by Ernest Lester Smith. He was a fellow of the Royal Society, the prestigious Scientific Academy of the United Kingdom. And Smith's book caused quite a bit of controversy when it came out. The premise is that through eons of evolution, needs have preceded the organs through which they are fulfilled. Eyes, ears, taste buds, kidneys, livers, and so forth. And since each new organ developed in response to a need, why would the brain be different? This book put forth a compelling argument that intelligence came first, quite able to function in its own realm. On top of the almost impossible, I would say impossible odds that those body parts could have evolved as a result of random mutations in survival of the fittest, I would add, how could life have come about by accident in the first place? Lester Smith touched on this as well. For life to form requires the basis of life, the DNA molecule, to have come about before the first celled animal life form came about in the primordial sea. And the DNA molecule can be compared to a computer program that is much more advanced than humans have yet devised. It tells the cell when and how to make proteins that are necessary for life. Just how advanced and complicated is it? According to an article on the website of BBC Science Focus magazine, the UK's leading science and technology monthly, I'm going to quote what they say on that website. The DNA in your cells is packed into 46 chromosomes in the nucleus, as well as a naturally helical molecule. DNA is supercoiled using enzymes so that it takes up less space. If you stretched the DNA in one cell out all the way, it would be about 2 meters long, and the DNA in all your cells would be about twice the diameter of the solar system. Now, how incredible is that? Just think of the enormous amount of information that's packed into DNA. Smith's book has been long forgotten, perhaps by everyone except me, because scientific materialists, physicists, shouted it down with a vengeance. But think of the intelligence that would be required to design any one of those organs, much less the DNA molecule. How could all of them have come about by chance? Random mutations followed by natural selection? Anyone who's done the math will say, absolutely impossible. And that's the problem. Who's really thought about the complexity of an eye, liver, kidney? Who could possibly think that could have happened by accident? And yet it appears back in 1975, the scientific community did just that. Okay, so life did not come about by accident. We are not meat robots. We are in fact the eyes and ears of what Max Planck said was a conscious and intelligent mind that is the matrix of all matter. Why does life on Earth exist? I'm going to tell you what I think, and why I think. I believe the purpose of life on Earth is evolution. The evolution of the intelligent mind that is the matrix of all matter, and the evolution of each one of us. Your goal is to become the best that you can be, which means you're here to self-actualize. Think about this. Life on Earth has been evolving for 3.8 billion years. It's been going on since the first one-celled organism formed and began dividing in the primordial sea. You, as a human being, are the pinnacle of evolution on this planet, and you have no doubt incarnated many times on Earth, and perhaps other planets. Reincarnation is a fact. This man, Ian Stevenson, then a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, began researching children's memories of past lives in 1962. He wrote a shelf full of books on the subject and was the head of what became the Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, in 1967, and he was head of that organization until he died in 2007. DOPS continues under the leadership of Jim B. Tucker, also a psychiatrist, whom I've interviewed twice. DOPS now has more than 2,500 cases in their files of children who remember past lives. 1,700 of these cases have been what they call solved, in that the person the child described was located based on names, occupations, locations, family members, and all that sort of thing. DOPS studies several different phenomena to do with consciousness, including near-death experiences, as well as terminal lucidity, which happens when a patient has been in a coma for a long period of time, or perhaps suffered from Alzheimer's, when they suddenly become lucid for a short time before death. By the way, my grandmother, this happened to my grandmother, who had been in a coma for months. DOPS researchers speculate that it happens when the brain releases its grip on the person's consciousness. The bottom line is that they believe, and they've come to the conclusion a number of years ago, at least 10 or 15, that the brain does not create consciousness, but rather is a receiver of consciousness that integrates it with the body. A source of information about reincarnation and the purpose of life comes from perhaps the most documented psychic of all time, Edgar Cayce. References to reincarnation appear in more than 14, and many of his more than 14,000 psychic readings that he gave at the request of people who were looking for solutions to and answers to cures to physical as well as psychological problems. A good deal of what they were dealing with turned out to have been unresolved issues that had originated in a previous life. If you want to know more about it, there's a book called Many Mansions that really goes into this. It's a good book. It's also true of a patient of Dr. Brian Weiss, a psychiatrist who was astonished and skeptical during a hypnotic trance. His patient began recalling past life traumas, seemed to hold the key to her recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks. Dr. Weiss became a believer in reincarnation during that therapy, and once she was cured, he wrote what became a best-selling book called Many Lives, Many Masters, the true story of a prominent psychiatrist, his young patient, and the past life therapy that changed both their lives. It seems that many of us continually attract the same sorts of situations over and over again. For example, some people habitually attract partners of the opposite sex who abuse them. The reason might be that subconsciously they have a low opinion of themselves. And since the fundamental law of metaphysics, as any Rosicrucian adept will tell you, is that like attracts like, they attract others who also have a low opinion of themselves. Edgar Cayce called this karma that needs to be overcome. Now, most people think of karma as retribution, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But apparently, that's not how Cayce thought. According to his psychic readings, karma is a learning tool that we humans will continue to meet situations similar to those that cause the karma until we start making the right choices. I think this movie, Groundhog Day, is the perfect allegory for what life on Earth is about. Bill Murray's character, the protagonist, starts out as a self-centered jerk who, through some seemingly magical force, must experience the same day over and over again. Like clockwork, each day, the same things happen from dawn to dusk in the same sequence. And this goes on for almost infinite number of days. He gets so sick of it that he actually tries to commit suicide. But he still wakes up the next morning to find that it's Groundhog Day all over again. Finally, for whatever reason, he changes his selfish and cynical approach to life and reacts to each situation with harmony, love, and compassion. And that's when the breakthrough occurs. Once the quality of his consciousness evolved to a level that produces right action, he not only is able to progress to February 3rd, he gets the girl, Andy McDowell, who happens to play that part. So you and I are like Bill Murray's character, except that instead of experiencing Groundhog Day over and over again until we get it right, we continue incarnating until we do. So the question is, where are we headed? We can expect what can we expect when we finally learn the lessons of life? By the way, Edgar Cayce did tell some people that this was their last incarnation on Earth. Well, it seems to me that the Raw Contact, Teaching of the Law of One, the series of books that was produced from a channeling back in the early 1980s, might have the answer to what's next. There are 5 books in this Law of One series, and they purport to come from a group soul of an advanced civilization that evolved on the planet Venus while Earth was still primarily a smoldering rock. And it's interesting that at that time, Venus was much like Earth, according to NASA. Venus may have been hospitable. So anyway, according to Ra, and this seems to make sense, the purpose of the creation of the universe was for the source, or creator, to know and experience him, her, itself. For this goal to be fully achieved required the evolution of consciousness in beings that are offshoots, but remain part of the creator. Now, from here on, I'm going to call the creator with a he pronoun. He's not a he or a she, but I don't feel comfortable using it. As mentioned earlier, the creator is all that is. He cannot step outside himself and know himself except by sending out pieces of himself that become seemingly separate, but remain, in fact, part of and an extension of him. The source is infinite consciousness, and each one of us and all things are sparks or pieces of this infinite consciousness in the process of evolving toward reunification with him. The upshot is that your consciousness began as what might be thought of as one of these sparks, and it has evolved on Earth and perhaps other planets from the very low level of consciousness that exists in matter to the much higher level it is today, which happens to be the stage of awareness of self that Ra refers to as third density. The Creator has experienced himself through you from your beginning, and he continues to experience himself through you as well as through everyone and everything in his creation. The Creator has instilled in you and in all life the desire to evolve. And by pursuing this instinctive desire, you will eventually reunite with Him. That's correct. No matter what, you will reunite with Him someday. But there's still a long way to go. Much more than half of the people alive today on this planet remain in third density, in what I think of as the sleepwalking state, and most of us have taken only baby steps into fourth density, which is the stage we residents of Earth are moving into now. Some of us will make the transition and many will not. According to Ra, over the course of evolution, from the very beginning to reunification, there are 7 densities. 7 densities. The first density was the stage Earth was in before life formed. And the second density was Earth when life was not self-aware, in other words, plants and animals. And the third density would be, the next density, the third density, came when we humans gained self-awareness, the ability to figuratively step outside ourselves and think about things objectively, such as the meaning of life, good and evil. Or as Shakespeare said, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So we entered third density when we developed egos and began to exercise free will. You may have heard others say that this time we live in is a period of transition. It's true, I think. We are moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, and Ra would say we're moving from third density to fourth. And once we move fully into fourth, we'll still have 5, 6, and 7 to go. Ra calls the 7 densities octaves, and that explains the evolution of consciousness, and explains that the evolution of consciousness works in 7 stages within each density. What drives evolution is the desire to increase our vibratory rate, and therefore, as we evolve, to achieve higher levels of consciousness, which ultimately will lead to reunification with the Creator. Yet all the while, we will retain our sense of self, and that will continue to be so when we eventually achieve reunification. When that happens, what then will be our social memory complex will become a new universe ready to begin the process all over again, at least according to Ra. As mentioned, third density is characterized by self-awareness and is at the stage at which half or more than half of people are currently. Fortunately, it's the shortest stage in terms of reincarnation cycles because it is also the most intense of all 7 densities. I say fortunately because it is the stage in which we suffer and encounter the most difficulty. According to Ra, third density is at least 100 times more difficult to navigate than any other level. I go into all this in much more detail in my book, Fast Track to Consciousness. But let me wrap up this talk by explaining what I think will help anyone progress out of third density and into fourth, which according to Ra will be a whole lot better place to be, much more pleasant. And I believe it's possible actually to achieve it in this lifetime. I've just put out a new book, a short little book called Mastery, Discover and Pursue Your Purpose, Find Meaning and Fulfillment. In it I write that I think each one of us incarnated with the ultimate goal of becoming the best person we can be. We come here to self-actualize and to achieve what I've labeled mastery. I think we can do so by spending time in meditation and in thought in order to determine what we love to do, what I call our dharma. And then to figure out how to use that dharma or that thing that puts us in the zone in a way that will help others in some way and service to others. Ra says that there are 2 kinds of fourth density, service to self and service to others. And I'm going to talk about the service to self fourth density because I'm hoping that's the one I'll be in. Service to others sounds like a horrible place where people are going to be fighting to be king of the hill. So when we come to Earth, we embark on that path. And most people don't realize it because of the worldview we have that has come about from physicalism. They think that eat, drink, and be merry is why you're here. You know, make a lot of money, get a big house in the suburb, drive a Mercedes-Benz, whatever. And that doesn't lead to fulfillment. So find what you love to do, figure out a way, put it to work in service to others. That's what will bring fulfillment, and that's what will take you into fourth density. Now, the other thing that we need to think about and worry about is our egos, which tend to be fearful and selfish. Next slide. Yeah, there's the ego. In order to grow into all that you can be, it's important to realize that we're not our egos. I think I previously stated that your ego and my ego is a construction that came about as a result of the environment to which we were born and the society into which we were born. It's the way it is today because of what we were taught. And a lot of us were taught that life is really basically meaningless and that death is the end. So now that we know that that's not true, we need to realize that the ego is a fearful construction that wants to keep us safe in all ways, but sometimes we need to step out from that. And it's important to realize that because it's in construction, it can be changed or modified or even ignored if you decide it's in your best interest to do so. Think about this for a minute or two. A moment exists between stimulus and response. In other words, between the instant something happens and your reaction to it. You can decide not to react. Nothing says you actually have to react in a way your ego would have you do so. You can simply step away from the message and the emotion your ego is sending you and take a moment to stop and think. Ask yourself, why did my ego, how is it programmed to cause me to act this way? Was it something I was taught or experienced? Maybe it's really in my best interest not to behave in the way my ego would have me behave. Most people do not know this, and so they actually think they are their egos. Truth being that they are not. They're extensions of the one source. So reality is blocked from them. They react to and experience their ego selves and become so wrapped up in it that they, what I call, sleepwalk through life. Well, let me end my talk with this. It took quite a while, quite a few years, but I finally figured out what I love to do and use it in service to others. In other words, I discovered my mission. Writing is what puts me in the zone. And for at least 30 years or so, my mission has been to use that activity to burst the myth of scientific materialism in order to wake people out of their sleepwalking state. My goal is for them to realize that they are sparks of the Creator and that they're here on earth to evolve. They are magnificent spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience. I'd like to finish my talk by reading what Alan Watts used to say to children when they wondered why they're here, and how the universe came about, where people go when they die. He, of course, was a philosopher. He told them that God plays hide and seek, that God enjoys the game, but has no one outside himself to play with, since he is all that is. He overcomes this problem of being all and therefore not having any playmates by pretending he's not himself. Instead, he pretends that he's you and me and all the other people and animals and rocks and stars and planets and in so doing, he has wonderful and wondrous adventures. So here's what he wrote, and I quote, "Now, when God plays hide and seek and pretends that he is you, he does it so well that it takes him a long time to remember where and how he hid himself. But that's the whole fun of it, just what he wanted to do. He doesn't want to find himself too quickly, for that would spoil the game. That is why it is so difficult for you and me to find out that we are God in disguise, pretending not to be himself. But when the game has gone on long enough, all of us will wake up, stop pretending, and remember that we are all one single self, the God who is all there is and who lives forever and ever. Thank you.